Right here, you see an alleged message from Katie Hudson Seymour, who is the biological mother of Warren Hudson, who is pretty much the spokesperson for all the white kids that were around during Nolan Wells' death. And this is a message that she sent to Boogie Lowdown on Facebook after he posted a lot of pictures and information concerning the death of our young brother Nolan. I'm going to read some of these messages to you. But first, let's take a look at Miss Hudson. Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings, all praises to the Most High. And Katie Hudson is the biological mother of Warren Hudson and somebody who we have not taken a very close look at because of the actions and the suspicions of Judge Ashley Cole, which are very much warranted. But we must remember that Katie Hudson Seymour also loves her son very, 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 very much and will do anything in the world to make sure that he is all right. So let's look at Katie real quick. So this is her page, Katie Hudson Seymour. You see she's the owner and founder of Tour de Coast. University of Southern Mississippi is where she attended school. And look at this picture up here. Now, evidently, this is Katie. I think she's the one in the tan pantsuit in the middle, along with some other females on the bottom. And then at the top, you see Warren in the middle. And maybe that is her current husband, Mr. Seymour. And I guess that is Wyatt's little brother. Remember the little brother who was reportedly got into the fight, which we have also not heard much about. But looking at that picture of this little brother, I am reminded of a video that I have posted about that particular altercation on the beach, which a lot of people are still not talking about. Let's take a look at it. You see, this is a still shot of the video of the white boy on the beach that got, is buddied up or bloodied up, it looks like. So if you go back and forth to this picture and this picture, you see that the little brother in this picture definitely looks like the boy in this picture, even though it's kind of blurry, but, they have the, same frame and the same head shape. And, I've watched this a couple of times and it definitely looks like him. Let's put them side by side real quick. So this is an aspect that many people have not explored. With the interview with Officer Ruckus, Warren explicitly stated that, he had went over to where his brother was fighting at, and, he got into it with some other guys and things like this. This is possibly the altercation that his brother got into. Nobody is really talking about that, right? Because that looks exactly like the young man. Nevertheless, at the beginning, at the onset, at the genesis of this case, Warren's mother reached out to this guy, allegedly, and his guy's name, Boogie Lowdown, on Facebook. And I'm going to read what the text messages said, or the DM said, which contradicts a lot of the information that we have begun to gather as this case have went on. Just watch. And here, you read it. Sunday at 11:26. Good evening, Mr. Roll Down. I am Warren's mother, the woman you have been talking about on Facebook and posting pictures of our family. I am here to tell you that we all Nolan and are all deeply distraught. Maybe she meant we all love Nolan. Your information is not correct, and I ask you to please stop posting about Warren and our family. My son did not ride out with him, nor did he come back with him. Now, how do you know all of this? The boat that Nolan was supposed to get on, Wyatt boat. He repeatedly asked Nolan to get on boat at 5. She must not be very smart because she says get one boat. at 5 when it was time to leave. But Nolan wanted to stay with a girl, and their boat was parked next to his. So she's saying that Katie's boat was parked next to his. He was insistent about staying with this girl. Wyatt asked him several times to please get on the boat, and people heard him. My son loves him and would never in 1,000,000 years leave him.
Breaking, Warren's real mom finally speaks out. What she revealed about Nolan Wells is shocking here, is what nobody told you about this case. Before the lawyers, before the coordinated statements, before the silence became a strategy, one woman from Warren Hudson's own family was already talking. And what she said on the very first night does not match what his family told the public afterward. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. On the 4th of July, he traveled to Horn Island, Mississippi, with a group of friends to celebrate. Horn Island is a remote, uninhabited barrier island off the Gulf Coast. No roads, no permanent structures, no emergency services. Access is by boat only. After dark, it is essentially cut off from the mainland. Nolan went out there with people he trusted, people who had been to his life and whose family he had visited. He did not come home. His body was recovered from the water 2 days later, on July 6th. And what followed, the silence, the shifting accounts, the forensic findings, and the 9-hour gap that nobody has cleanly explained, is exactly what we are going to walk through today. If you are new here, you are watching Unrivaled True Crime. This channel does not move on from cases that are not closed. Hit subscribe right now and turn on the bell notification, because this case is still developing and you need to be here when it does. Now, let's get into it. The initial response from local authorities framed Nolan's death as a likely accidental drowning. That word, likely, was attached before either autopsy had been completed, before the forensic findings came back, before the full circumstances of that day had been examined. The word was offered early, and Nolan's family rejected it entirely. Christine Wansley, Nolan's mother, commissioned an independent autopsy. The state of Mississippi had already conducted its own. Both examinations were completed. Both came back with the same finding. Cause of death, undetermined, pending further investigation. Manner of death, undetermined, pending investigation. Two separate forensic examinations, conducted independently, and neither one was willing to call this an accidental drowning. That is not a minor detail. That is the foundation of everything that followed. A forensic pathologist reviewing the publicly available details of both reports explained what that word carries in a clinical context. In a straightforward accidental drowning, you typically find specific markers: water in the lungs consistent with active breathing while submerged, a toxicology profile that either shows impairment or does not, and no significant external findings pointing in a different direction. When a cause of death comes back undetermined, it means the pathologist could not conclusively rule this a drowning. It means something in the physical evidence gave them pause. It means competing possibilities exist that the science alone cannot eliminate. Undetermined means the body could not tell investigators exactly how Nolan entered the water, which means the people who were last with him are the only ones who can answer that question. And those people have not given a single consistent account. Most of the coverage around this case has centered on one particular voice from Warren Hudson's side of the family, Ashley Cole, Warren's stepmother. She made the first public statement representing Warren's family. It was posted on Facebook on July 7th, 3 full days after Nolan disappeared, and 2 full days after his body had already been found. 3 days of public silence from the stepmother. That gap is documented. But Ashley Cole was not the first member of Warren's family to speak about this case. She was not even close. There is another woman in this family who spoke before any public statement was made, before any attorney was publicly involved, before anyone had time to coordinate a version of events. That woman is Katie Hudson Seymour, Warren Hudson's biological mother. She did not wait 3 days. She reached out to a content creator on July 5th, the same day the search for Nolan was underway, at 11:26 in the evening. What she wrote in that private message is the most important piece of this case that almost nobody is talking about. Because she wrote it before the story had been decided, and it does not match the story that came later. Her message begins with these words: "Good evening. I am Warren's mother, the woman you have been talking about on Facebook and posting pictures of our family." Stop at that opening line. She does not begin with concern for Nolan. She does not open by asking for help finding him or by expressing grief. Her first sentence is about her family being discussed online. The very first instinct in that message is defensive. That is the documented opening of an uncoached, unlawyered, privately written statement sent while a search was still active for an 18-year-old boy. She continues, "I am here to tell you that we all love Nolan and are all deeply distraught." And then she writes this line: "My son did not ride out with him, nor did he come back with him. That sentence is the center of the entire contradiction. Because Warren Hudson later sat down for a podcast interview and described that day in significant detail. He talked about being on the boat. He talked about the bilge pump failing. He talked about water coming into the hull. He described asking Nolan to get on and Nolan refusing. Warren placed himself on that island, on that boat, that day, in his own words, on a recorded interview. His biological mother, writing privately on the first night, before any of that had been said publicly, told a different story entirely. She wrote that her son did not ride out with Nolan and did not come back with him. Both of those accounts cannot be true at the same time. She keeps going in the message. She writes, "The boat that Nolan was supposed to get on, Wyatt's boat, he repeatedly asked Nolan to get on at 5 o'clock. When it was time to leave, Nolan wanted to stay with a girl, and their boat was parked next to his. He was insistent about staying with this girl. Wyatt asked him several times to please get on the boat, and people heard him." Then she writes, "My son loves him and would never in 1,000,000 years leave him. Warren does not even have a boat." Then later in the same message, "As a matter of fact, he was the first person that noticed he was missing when they got back to their friend's house and called his mother, the Coast Guard, and the sheriff's office." Now hold that claim and examine it against the documented timeline. If Warren and his group called the Coast Guard and the sheriff's office when they got back to shore, the missing person report was not filed until after midnight. That is on record. If those calls were made immediately upon returning, if they were made with urgency and with genuine concern that a friend had been left behind on an uninhabited island, why did it take until after midnight for a formal report to be submitted? That window has not been explained. And then she adds something that appears in no other statement from any member of Warren's family. Not in Ashley Cole's Facebook post, not in Warren's podcast interview, not in any public account from their side. She writes, "I brought my other son out there, and I saw my son Warren briefly and took a picture. We were not out there with them longer than 10 minutes. She was on Horn Island that day, with another son. For approximately 10 minutes, she saw Warren. She took a photograph. That detail is sourced entirely from her own words in that message. It has not been corroborated, and it has not been addressed publicly by anyone else in the family. It emerged here, in a private message, on the first night, before anyone had assembled the narrative. Now take every version of this story and place them side by side, because this is where it becomes impossible to overlook. Warren Hudson, in his podcast interview, says he was on the boat, asked Nolan to get on, described the mechanical failure, and describes Nolan's decision to stay with a girl on a nearby boat. Ashley Cole, in her Facebook post on July 7th, says the boat was taking on water due to a bilge pump issue, and that Nolan made the decision to stay on the island and return with another group. Katie Hudson Seymour, in her private message on July 5th, says Warren was not on the boat at all, that Warren does not even have a boat, while simultaneously saying Wyatt asked Nolan to get on, which requires someone to have been present to witness those requests. And then there is the account from Katie McCormack's family. Katie McCormack was 19 years old. She was on Horn Island that day with a completely separate group. She is the girl that Warren's group says Nolan chose to stay behind for. Her sister Gracie spoke to the Daily Mail. She said Katie assumed Nolan was getting ready to board the boat he came out on. She said Katie assumed the friends telling him to get on the boat would not have left him there. So Warren's group says Nolan chose to stay with Katie. Katie's own family says she believed Nolan was leaving with the boys. That is not a minor discrepancy in memory. That is a direct contradiction about the most consequential decision of that day, the decision about who was staying and who was going, and those two versions cannot coexist. A former federal prosecutor analyzing case structures where multiple witnesses give conflicting accounts made a distinction that is precise and important. She said that when people who were all present at the same event give accounts that do not match, that alone is not unusual. Stress distorts memory. Trauma compresses time. People genuinely remember details differently. That is human, and that is normal. But she said, when accounts do not match, and they all consistently point away from the same group of people, that is not a memory issue. That is coordination, or at minimum, self-preservation. And the investigative question that follows is straightforward. Has every account from every person on that boat been pressure tested independently? Separate rooms, same questions in different order, answers compared line by line. 4 sources, 4 versions, 1 dead teenager. And the version that came first, before anyone had time to compare notes, is the one that contradicts the rest. Now let's build the actual timeline of July 4th, because the hours between the last confirmed sighting and the missing person report are where the real questions live. Nolan Wells traveled to Horn Island with Warren's group. During the day, he spent time socializing on the island. By the accounts of people on both boats, he had interaction with Katie McCormack's group, whose boat was reportedly positioned near the one he arrived on. The last time anyone in Warren's group claims to have seen Nolan Wells alive was at approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The group reportedly left the island at approximately 4:30. A missing person report was not filed until after midnight. That is a documented gap of at least 9 hours between the last confirmed sighting and any formal notification to authorities. 9 hours is not a gap in memory. 9 hours is a sequence of decisions. What was done in those hours, who was contacted, in what order, and why? Those are the questions the investigation must answer and has not yet answered publicly. Warren Hudson reportedly called Christine Wansley, Nolan's mother, late on July 4th. The word late carries no confirmed timestamp. No specific time has been publicly documented. Late could mean many things. And that vagueness is its own problem, because it leaves the entire evening unaccounted for. A former federal prosecutor addressed the question of who you call first in a genuine emergency with precision. She said who you call first tells investigators what you already know. In a real emergency, when a friend may have been left on an uninhabited island in the dark, surrounded by open Gulf water, with no boat and no way to reach shore, you call the United States Coast Guard. They have jurisdiction, they have vessels, they have search equipment, they have the ability to reach Horn Island after dark. A mother sitting at home in Alabama does not have any of those capabilities. So when the first call goes to the mother and not the Coast Guard, investigators ask a different set of questions. Not as an accusation, but as investigative logic applied to a documented sequence of events that has not been explained. The racial dimension of this case is not a sidebar. It is documented, it is central, and it cannot be separated from the investigative facts. Nolan Wells was black. Every friend in the group he went to Horn Island with was white. This happened in Mississippi. And the initial classification from local law enforcement, likely accidental drowning, was applied before either autopsy had been completed. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump, retained by the Wells family, made a public statement that is now part of the documented record of this case. He said that if the roles were reversed, if a white teenager had disappeared on an uninhabited island with a group of black friends and turned up dead 2 days later, every single one of those friends would have been detained and questioned that night. Not 9 hours later, not the following morning, that night. The Knocket passed a formal resolution calling for a full independent investigation into Nolan's death. The FBI was formally asked to review the case for potential civil rights violations. These are not claims. These are documented institutional responses to how this case was handled in its earliest hours. They reflect a systemic concern that the initial investigation may not have treated this with the urgency it required, and that the reason for that insufficient urgency is connected to who Nolan was. The community has been asking, since the body was recovered, whether this case would have moved differently if Nolan Wells had looked different. That is not a question this channel is raising to inflame. It is the question that is driving the federal review, the knock resolution, and the sustained public pressure that has kept this case from quietly closing. Christine Wansley did not accept the first answer she was given. She commissioned an independent autopsy. She retained Ben Crump. She engaged with federal authorities. She maintained public pressure on this case, through every news cycle that tried to move on. She is the reason a case that was initially framed as a likely accident is now in front of a grand jury. She said publicly that Nolan deserved better than to be left on an island. She said he deserved better than silence. She said he deserved better than stories that keep changing. That last phrase is precise. The stories have changed. The accounts have not held. And a mother who buried her son is still waiting for a single, honest, consistent answer about what happened to him in those final hours on July 4th. Now here is exactly where this case stands in 2026. No charges have been filed. No arrests have been made. No individual has been formally named as a suspect. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has described the investigation as ongoing. The FBI review for potential civil rights implications remains active, and prosecutors are actively preparing to present evidence to a grand jury. That last element is the one that matters most right now, and here is why. A grand jury does not operate like a trial. There is no defense attorney in the room. The standard is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The standard is probable cause, meaning prosecutors must demonstrate that there is enough credible evidence to reasonably conclude a crime may have occurred. Getting to a grand jury in a case that was initially classified as a likely accidental drowning is not a routine step. It is a significant escalation. It represents a point where someone inside the system looked at the available evidence and determined it warranted a deeper legal examination. That did not happen automatically. It did not happen because this case is simple or because the evidence is overwhelming in one direction. It happened because Christine Wansley refused to accept the first answer. It happened because the knock formalized their concern. It happened because the FBI engaged. It happened because two independent autopsies both refused to call this accidental. It happened because the community kept pressure on this case long after the initial coverage faded. That is documented momentum, built piece by piece, by a family and a community that refused to let this close. So here is where everything rests. Katie Hudson Seymour spoke before any other member of Warren's family said a single word publicly. She spoke on day one, privately, at 11:26 in the evening, while the search for Nolan was still active. She wrote without legal guidance. She wrote without coordination. And what she wrote does not match what Warren Hudson later said in a recorded podcast interview. She said her son was not on the boat. Warren said he was. Those two statements cannot both be true. And the one that came first, the one written before anyone had time to decide on a version, is the one that contradicts everything that followed. The 9-hour gap between the last confirmed sighting of Nolan Wells and the filing of a missing person report has not been explained by any member of the group in a documented, timestamp verified account. The question of who was called first, and when, and why that person instead of the Coast Guard has not been answered on the record. Two autopsies conducted independently both returned a finding of undetermined. Not accidental, not homicide. Undetermined, a word that means the physical evidence alone does not close the case, and that only the people present can provide what the science cannot. 4 accounts from 4 sources about the events of that afternoon contain direct contradictions that have never been reconciled. The girl Nolan allegedly chose to stay for, through her own family, said she believed he was leaving with the boys. The boys say he chose to stay with her. Those two things cannot both be true. Ben Crump is on record. The NOP is on record. The FBI review is documented. Grand jury proceedings are active. And Christine Wansley is still waiting. She is still waiting for a consistent account, still waiting for the stories to stop changing, still waiting for someone who was on that island to say, out loud, exactly what happened between 3 o'clock in the afternoon and midnight. The answers to every question in this case exist. They exist in the memories of people who were present on Horn Island on July 4th. They exist in text messages, phone records, and the documented sequence of calls made that evening. They exist in the forensic findings that both pathologists were not willing to call accidental. The answers are there. They have simply not been spoken aloud yet. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He went to an island with friends he trusted. He had been to their homes. Their family described him as the sweetest friend, someone they all adored. He did not make it back to the mainland. His mother has spent every day since July 4th fighting for a truthful accounting of what happened to her son. He deserved to come home. He deserved honest answers. And this case deserves the sustained attention that the people closest to it have been demanding since the beginning. The grand jury is meeting now. The FBI review is active. The forensic findings are still being examined by attorneys and investigators on multiple sides. This case is not finished. Not by any legal measure, not by any evidentiary measure, and not by the measure of a mother who is still waiting. If you have been watching this channel and following this case, you already know we do not move on from stories that are not closed. When the grand jury returns a decision, and it will, we will be the first to break it down line by line, with full context and without speculation. Every legal implication, every piece of evidence, every development will be covered here completely. Subscribe to Unrivaled True Crime right now and hit the bell so you are notified the moment anything moves in this case. If this video gave you information you had not seen anywhere else, leave a like. It tells us to keep going, and it tells this platform to push this story to more people who deserve to know what is happening. Nolan's mother is still waiting for answers. The least we can do is still be paying attention when those answers finally come.